Hello, everyone. My name is Philipp Schmidt. I work at the MIT Media Lab. And I'm not going to talk about online courses. I'm going to talk about breaking the rules, challenging the status quo, maybe writing new rules, and about paper planes. So I've been let's see if this works. I've been a huge fan of paper planes all my life. And a few months ago, we hosted a dinner at the Media Lab for people interested in learning research. And as an icebreaker, we all decided to make a paper plane and then talk about our planes around the table. And so I made a paper plane, everyone else made a paper plane, and we shared stories about how we'd learned to make this plane from our dad, or how this plane was better than other planes. And most of the planes, they're all different, but they all looked like a paper plane. They all kind of looked the same. And there's one gentleman, we kind of go around the table, and there's one gentleman at the end, and he holds up something that looks totally different. He holds up something like this. And so I'm thinking, maybe he's not made a paper plane because he thinks it's stupid to make paper planes. Or he's made a crown, and there's some story about the paper plane. But he doesn't say very much. He just kind of, and I hope this works, he just kind of goes like this. Well, he did it better. I'll try this again. And it turns out this is also a paper plane. And let's see this again. A little bit better, yeah. I think there's an interesting lesson in there. But I want to invite you to make paper planes as well. So if you are like me and you easily get bored doing talks, then feel free to fiddle with the papers, and maybe we can do something with paper planes later. You don't have to make a paper plane, but I'd also love to see some new designs in case some of you have great paper plane designs. And I think there are a few more in the back there in case we run out. So feel free to be folding paper planes throughout the talk, and if you get distracted by paper planes, that's totally fine. But for me, the interesting thing about this paper plane was that so often we have these mental models, and we're not always aware of them. And so if you go to the airport and you look at all the planes, it's the same thing. It's like small ones and big ones, but they all kind of look like planes until there's something that doesn't look like a plane. And I've been kind of mulling this over. How can we discover new ideas? And the field that I work in is learning. And so in learning, a lot of what we see under the headline of innovation kind of looks like what we've seen for hundreds of years. And we often we make the same paper planes in education technology, and in the way we design our classrooms, and in the way we break up the disciplines, and in the way we structure the university degree. And there's like a little bit of innovation around the edges. Sometimes the planes are bigger or smaller, but largely they all still look exactly like planes. And I started thinking about this in the context of learning, sparked by the work of my colleague Ross Pekar, which is maybe a little hard to see, but there's one interesting thing in here, but I'll tell you what. So she measured the electrodermal activity of an MIT student over the course of a year. Electrodermal activity is like a proxy for engagement. So like, how engaged are you in something? And then she asked the student to track what he was doing, and then afterwards she kind of mapped those two things. And the key one is the yellow stuff, which is throughout the entire week, the lowest level of engagement that the MIT student had was when he was sitting in class. And on the upside, we know he wasn't sleeping, because if he had been sleeping, it would have been much higher, his engagement, than it was. So I guess there's something positive to be said about the classes at MIT. But this kind of related to the paper plane example is we kind of have this mental model of what education should look like, and we almost never stop to ask if the mental model is correct, if there is a totally different way of doing things. And maybe we should be looking for the areas in this week where the student is really engaged, which happen to be things like labs, right? So maybe the labs should be what the student does most of the week, and there should be a little bit of classes rather than the other way around. But so sparked by this research, I went around the MIT campus and I asked people, I kind of wanted to discover, well, how do people really learn? If they don't learn sitting in classes, then how do they learn? And so we asked a whole bunch of people, students, alumni, professors, administrators, someone from the admissions office, and we asked them, what was your most meaningful learning experience at MIT? How did you learn something? What were the other people that were involved with this? When did it happen? How did it happen? And I want to talk about some of the stories that I heard in these conversations to you today. There's one story in particular. So on September 11th, 2006, and I'll go back one. This is the dome at MIT. It's kind of like the sign of serious academic work. This is where graduation happens. This is where people throw their hats in the air. So this is serious. This says serious university. So September 11th, 2006, the MIT community wakes up. There's a fire truck on top of our dome. I heard the story from the woman who was responsible for this, who put the fire truck on the dome, because it was her reply to my question, what was the most meaningful learning experience that you have had at MIT? And she went on and did a PhD at Berkeley and became a successful scientist, actually in Germany, now lives in Germany. And she looked back at her academic career, and she said, it wasn't just the most meaningful learning experience, it's also still the thing I'm most proud of that I have accomplished. And so I found that very intriguing, and I kind of dug in, and I wanted to learn more. So if you want to put a fire truck on the MIT dome, what do you need to do? Well, first of all, and this was a surprise, you have to read a lot of regulation, building regulations. So they read the international, the Massachusetts, and the Cambridge building regulations on housing and external structures to houses, because they wanted to make sure that the structure would withstand a wind of 90 miles per hour, which is the legal requirement for adding a structure to your house. Then they went back to their class textbooks in mechanics and civil engineering, and they applied what they'd learned in the first semester to the calculations of putting the fire truck on top of the dome. I'll come back to this. There is something interesting there. Then they had to go and raise a bunch of money, $757.15. That doesn't sound like a lot to most of you, but for an MIT undergraduate, that's a lot of money. And so they had to go around, ask their parents, ask their friends, not always tell them what the money was for, raised a bunch of money from people in Cambridge who liked the idea of putting a fire truck on the dome, and also recycled things that they could find for cheap, right? So they had a friend who knew someone who knew someone who knew someone who had a scrapyard, who happened to have a truck, and if you want to put a fire truck on the dome, you need a truck. So they found a crappy old rusted truck, and they brought it back. They bought it, and they brought it back to MIT. They found a bunch of students who'd taken the introductory course in welding, which happens to be a course you can take at MIT, and so the students who had taken the welding course were recruited into the project team. They designed a structure that they could hang the pieces on that would essentially form the truck. They put the metal sheets on there, they polished them, they painted them, they took them off again, they put them on again, and then when things started coming together, they kind of designed a new logo for the fire truck, they painted it, and so it was a pretty big operation. So now we have a truck, we've built a fire truck, and we have to start thinking about how we're going to put this thing together. Right? So the goal was, because it has to happen at night, 30 minutes, no light, no sound. So from 57 pieces into one fire truck in under 30 minutes. Well, how do you do it? You practice. So they found a quiet place where they could try this. And they did this a couple of times, and in the end, it took them 4 attempts of taking it apart, putting it back together, iterating, hacking on the design, making some changes. One of the design changes that they made is butterfly screws, because they're easy to put on with your fingers, and they don't make a lot of noise. And so 4 tries later, 24 minutes and 42 seconds, they had it down, the assembly, like a SWAT team of illegal hackers. I also think it's amazing that they still know it was 24 minutes and 42 seconds. This is official documentation of the project. OK, so we have a fire truck. We know how to take it apart and put it back together. How do we get it on top of the dome? It's 50 meters high. And it's not just the truck, but this thing is a little temperamental. It's 57 parts. The heaviest weighs about as much as an MIT undergraduate weighs. The largest piece is 4 meters long, and you have to do this in the middle of the night without anyone noticing. So when Liz talked about this project to me, we came to this point, and I said, well, how did you get it up on the dome? And she said, well, something that's very important about MIT hacks, it's a sense of awe and mystery. And so I'm not going to tell you. So I don't know. I don't know how they got it up there, but they certainly did. So it ended up on the dome, and she did give me there's a book apparently for repelling material that she recommended I should read, but they wouldn't tell me exactly how they did it. But reflecting back, right, this seems kind of like a fun little project, but it was actually very serious. It was 3 months in the design and planning and trying out things. It was a lot of knowledge that they had to draw on from their studies. It was a staff of 40 people from all different departments at MIT who were all volunteers, so motivating volunteers to work very hard, to work with each other, to collaborate with people from different disciplines. We all know that's hard. Imagine doing this while these kids are also trying to pass 4 or 5 classes at MIT undergraduate, which is hard enough. So managing a team of 40 people, Liz said that this was the largest project she's ever been in charge of. So doing a hack at MIT was a larger project, more ambitious than any of the projects she's been in charge of ever since as a successful scientist. And so coming back to where we started, she said, this is the most important learning experience I had during my time at MIT, and the accomplishment I am most proud of. Now, for anyone working at a university as a lecturer, as a professor, as an administrator, as an IT person, this is kind of a problem, because we don't design things that look anything like this. We have very nicely structured programs. We measure progress. We do assessments. We give classes. We print textbooks. Nothing that we do in formal education looks like putting a fire truck on the dome, and yet at a very good university in the world, one of the successful students says that this is the most important learning experience she's had. So how does MIT learn by hacking? And when you hear the term hacker, you probably think of some guy like this, or like this, or like this, come on, or like this. I'm pointing in the wrong direction, I think. It's always white men. They always wear hooded sweatshirts. There are weird ones and zeros projected onto them from the side usually, and they have really bad posture. I don't know. And actually, my favorite one is the first one where he holds the laptop on one hand, and he's typing with the other hand, hacking into your bank account, and he's wearing a tie. I don't think that's true. So who are the original hackers? And where does this tradition of hacking come from? So these are the original hackers. There's a club at MIT, the Model Railroad Club, that was popular in the 50s, that brought together a bunch of young men and their families who were interested in the systems that you could build to run little miniature trains in a room. This is on the second floor in Building 26 at MIT. And I have a few pictures of these hackers. They don't look anything like the other hackers. And they're really just curious about how things work. They think you can really only understand something if you take it apart and you put it back together. They're intrigued by the complexity of this whole thing. And they just want to play with technology and see what they can do. And so this started kind of like a hack. Like, it wasn't authorized. No one said you can build a huge model railway inside this room in Building 26. And they just kind of went ahead and did it. And the Coke machine is also famous. It was ridiculously expensive at the time, but they drank so much Coke that within 3 months they made back the entire investment that they needed to buy the machine. So there's a lot of lure and history around these hackers. And they termed they coined the term hacker, and they described what they meant by hacking. I like to use their definitions. If you look at the dictionary or Wikipedia, you find a different definition, and I think their definition is the correct one. So what is a hack? A hack is a project without a constructive end. And I've heard people joke that building a model railway certainly fits that description. A hack is an unusual and original solution to a problem. So it's a new solution to a problem. A hack is an activity that tests the limits of skill, imagination, and wit. And I would add, often it also tests the boundaries of systems that we're exploring. So it pushes against things that we may not fully understand. And there's a huge history of hacks at MIT, and if you're interested, you can go to hacks.mit.edu and see many more examples. These are just some of my favorites. The one on the right, is it the right? Yeah, is the old Media Lab building, and they put a Scrabble board on it, and a lot of the words are kind of funny terms in the MIT community. And then the left one, of course, is Tetris on Building 7, that you could actually play standing in front of the building. So we have a definition for hacks. They also have a definition for hacking. So what is hacking? Hacking is investigating a subject for its own sake. It's engaging in non-destructive mischief. It's doing something out of the ordinary. And it's exploring the inaccessible. So hacking culture started by people walking around the campus and trying to find and get into spaces that were either locked or not accessible, where there was an intriguing noise behind the door. They learned how to pick doors. And so the Model Railway Club kind of built on this culture and added technology to it. And a bunch of smart young kids interested in technology at MIT with kind of a playground to their that they can just roam wild, and you'll see things like I just showed you. But for me, the interesting thing is also, like, it's very easy to kind of describe hacking as it's just technical people. They just care about technical problems, and it's kind of computers and geeks. It turns out that there's a really strong ethical foundation to hacking, and so over the years, they've evolved these rules that they call the hacking ethics. And this sign is actually at MIT in a place that you can only reach if you are a hacker. So I haven't been there myself. But I'll just pick a few ones. So the safety is highest priority, safety of everyone involved. Be subtle, leave no evidence. Brute force is the last resort of the incompetent, which I think is good. Don't steal anything, don't drop things, don't drink and hack, never hack alone. And then there are two in here that are really related to learning, where one is, if you don't know how to do something, ask a more experienced hacker. Maybe they've done something similar and they can help you. And also, if you've discovered a new hack, tell other people about it, share your knowledge, make sure that they learn from your experience. So it's not about keeping things secret. It's not about being the best at getting into these rooms and not telling anyone about it. There's really a culture of sharing stories and tricks and tips around hacking. And in a way, if you look at these rules, they would be really good ethical rules for anyone, really, not just for hackers, right? Like, where's the one? Leave things as you found them or better. Right? Like, that's a really good rule for all of us. Don't steal anything. Help other people. Never drink and hack. I'm not sure I want to apply that to everything. But so for me, kind of hacking is maybe the kind of mental model that we should be paying more attention to when we're thinking about how universities work and also how universities could support new kinds of learning. So this new type of paper plane that's round, it doesn't look like a plane, maybe that's hacking, and we need to start thinking about the university as a place where hacking can happen. But if you are at a university and you're like, this will never happen at my university, and this is how on earth is this allowed at a place like MIT? So I have a couple of thoughts on this. First of all, it's not easy, and things go wrong. So here's a quote from a hacker who was arrested while hacking, and there were 3 of them. They faced felony charges. The message is much longer. She gave up hacking. She said, I'll never hack again. And I thought this was part of our culture. And I hit the real world, and I got arrested. And I'm afraid, and I won't be hacking again. And so hacking can go wrong. And MIT has a history of not always supporting people doing things that are kind of at the edges of what's legal or what some of us might consider hacking and other people might consider copyright theft. And it plays with that, right? It's not like there's one solution. So there's the tradition of hacking that MIT is very proud of. And this is from the official MIT handbook, where hacking is described as a long-standing tradition at MIT and a part of its culture. But then there's also the policy on hacking, which is if you're breaking the law and it's a hack, you're still breaking the law. You're still going to get in trouble, and you may still get ejected from the institute. So it's more of you have to figure this out on a case-by-case basis. There isn't an easy solution to this, but you can, I think, hold this tension between breaking the rules, letting people explore things that aren't endorsed by the institution, and then kind of being a kind of a supportive boundary that can push back and relax sometimes, and depending on what happens. And I've heard someone describe this during my interviews as the concept of crash pads over training wheels, that you have to give people space where they can do things that might be dangerous, and don't put training wheels on them where they can never fall over. Like, you want them to be able to fall over, but make sure they wear crash pads so if they do fall over, they don't get hurt in a serious way. And the story he told us was about the first solar car team at MIT. So there's this global competition for solar cars where student teams build cars that then compete against each other, and they race around the desert. And the first time they did this, a team from MIT wanted to participate, and they came to the administration. They said, we've built a solar car, we want to go to Australia, and we want to race these other teams. We think we have a chance. And of course, the first reaction was, are you crazy? You're going to go to Australia, the middle of the desert. No one's ever driven a solar car in the desert. But the administration worked with the students. They made some requirements that the car had to be safer than maybe it was in the first instance. And so then these students went off to Australia. And of course, they had a very fast car, and their car flipped over, and they rolled in the desert. They were the only car that flipped over, but they were also the only car that had a roll bar and where the driver was wearing a helmet. And the next year, all of the cars had roll bars. All of the drivers were wearing helmets. But I like the story because it didn't work out. They didn't win. They didn't go to Australia to win the race. They actually crashed. But they crashed in a way that was useful for them. They crashed in a way that was useful for everyone else. They learned something. I think it was an experience that probably they would say was one of the most memorable experiences of their MIT time. And I think that's what a university should be like. If you're interested in this, there are 2 great books, Hackers by Stephen Levy and Nightwork, which talks about especially the hacking culture at MIT. I highly recommend them. And I wanted to see how far I am. Yeah, so this was the plan for the talk, right? Kind of hacker culture, imagining new ways of learning, digital and institutional innovation. And then 3 weeks ago, something happened. And I've really been struggling with a lot of the things that I've taken for granted before. And I can describe it more as a feeling of the future suddenly arriving, and me and a lot of other people not being ready for it and not being prepared for it. And it starts with things like technology that's replacing humans. Increasingly, the things we thought we were always going to be doing, computers were never going to be good at, increasingly those things get done by machines and software. And while they're very supportive at the moment, they drive us to our work, and we get to design them, and we can also make sure that when we're crossing the street, the cars will stop or not. I'm a little faster than my video here, but the questions that these things raise, the ethical questions of how the cars should behave in the future, we don't have any frameworks for answering them. We don't know. The jobs that will be replaced by this technology, how we're going to deal with that, we don't have any answers. So culture shock number one. The second one is there's this famous 1984 Apple commercial that probably many of you have seen, where we're faced with this authoritarian information regime represented by the huge face on the screen, and he's screaming at all of us, and we're sitting there, and we're passive, and we're just being blasted by information. But fortunately, there's the rebel, and she comes in with the hammer, and then she's gonna, swing the hammer and then throw it at the screen, and it explodes, and Apple saves all of us. And unfortunately, this is actually where the thing ended. She never threw the hammer. And it's 2016 now, and it's the perfect 1984 has arrived, except we don't seem to notice. We have these devices, all of our data is owned by corporations. And then, to be frank, what sparked kind of this descent into depression was that now the data is controlled by people like this. And I'm afraid. I don't want to get into the politics and all of that, but I think there's one piece in the story where the university and everyone involved in universities has to take a careful look at what we're doing, and that is that this man doesn't believe in science, and the people who have voted for him don't believe in science. And we are so happy in our ivory towers where we're doing pure science and we're searching for the truth, and it's up to other people to apply that. I think that's false. I think we have to find ways to connect with the world. And I hope that the hacker culture and kind of the things that make a hacker and make a hack, thinking critically, questioning authority, working with others, asking questions that others haven't asked, noticing problems, noticing doors that are locked, collaborating, finding answers, designing solutions, making solutions, that all of those things are experiences and skills that people should develop at universities, and we can create environments where that could happen, but I'm worried that we're not doing enough of that right now. So I hope we can. Did anyone make a paper plane? Okay, we have more on this side. Okay, everyone hold the planes up. Okay, this side wins. So I was going to see if I can do a slow motion video of everyone throwing their plane up. Because ending on Trump is just too depressing. Okay, so I don't think I can get everyone, but I'm going to try as much as I can. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to hit record and then not shake this thing. And then after 2 seconds, all of you are going to throw your paper planes. Don't get hurt. Everyone ready? Okay, go.